Hey everybody, welcome back to It's Too Late to Apologize Book Reviews. I'm Stella, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today, I want to talk about all the books that I read when I was in school, so meaning elementary, junior high, and high school. And I wanted to talk about it because my last video, Lord of the Flies, really sort of started this thought of, books that I hadn't but also had read in school. I had talked to friends and coworkers and asked them if they'd ever read Lord of the Flies while they were in school. Some said yes, some said no. And so I thought I'd talk about the books that I did get to read in school and what I thought about them and what I thought about reading in school in general. So the interesting thing that a lot of people, or I hear from a lot of people, and I'm talking about the general population, not about the bookworms I know. The thing that I hear a lot is that the books that were recommended or that they read in school that their teachers made them read made them hate reading. And this was never my experience. Maybe if this was your experience, let me know in the comments down below. But this was never my experience. I always looked at every year in language arts, which is what English is called in Canada. It's called, or at least in Alberta, it's called language arts. I loved the prospect of getting new books in my sweaty little hands. So I was always excited to hear what we were going to be reading that year. Call me a nerd. I don't really care. And what's interesting is I actually went online and found a list for Alberta for the authorized novels and nonfiction list for the English language arts. And so, I mean, if anybody else is interested in this list, I'll link it in the description box below. So I was looking through this list, and what I came to find was that several of the books that I had read while I was in school aren't on the reading list anymore, and a whole bunch of other ones are now. So I found this sort of interesting. So I can't remember the exact order in which I read these, especially the younger age novels. So these would have been novels that I would have read in grades 4, 5, and 6. Those are sort of a blur as to when I read what. And I'm sure I could look up the preferred reader age for each of those books, but who's got the time for that? So the books that I read in the years of grades 4, 5, and 6 would have been, Charlotte's Web, James and the Giant Peach, The Outsiders, Julie of the Wolves, and Island of the Blue Dolphins. And what's interesting is of these, this first group of books, I loved all of them. The only one that I didn't like was James and the Giant Peach. There was only 2 books in my school years that I basically gave up on reading. I usually don't DNF books, but I just gave up on James and the Giant Peach. And I'm not exactly sure why. One of the things was the idea of someone living inside a peach just seemed so gross and sticky, and I'm not sure if it was the writing. I don't remember. I couldn't get into it. And so I just sort of answered all the tests and flew by the seat of my pants through any of those exams. And I'm sure my teachers knew, but anyways, moving right along. So now Charlotte's Web seems like such classic book that I'm not even sure if I need to give it an introduction, but it's about a pig and a spider and it happens on a farm, and the animals can talk to each other and communicate with each other, and they become really good friends, and tragic things happen, and it was such an amazing book. And then there's James and the Giant Peach, which, as I said, I didn't read. Just looking it up on Wikipedia, I wonder if the reason I didn't take to it is because it just sounds very fantastical. So from Wikipedia, the plot summary for James and the Giant Peach is: James Henry Trotter is a boy who lives happily with his parents in a house by the sea. Unfortunately, when he is 4 years old, a rhinoceros with a strange carnivorous appetite escapes from the zoo and eats James' parents, so he ends up with his 2 cruel aunts, Spiker and Sponge. Instead of caring for him, they treat him badly, feed him improperly, and force him to sleep on bare floorboards. After James has been living with his aunts for 3 years, he meets a mysterious man who gives him a bag of magical crystals. Look out for men giving you bags of magical crystals. Okay, just say no, kids. Anyways, he meets a mysterious man who gives him a bag of magical crystals, instructing James to use them in a potion that will change his life for the better. While returning home, James stumbles and spills the bag on the ground, losing the crystals as they dig themselves underground. A nearby peach tree, in turn, produces a single peach, which soon grows to the size of a house. James is assigned to clean the rubbish around the peach and finds a tunnel inside it. He enters it and meets Centipede, Miss Spider, Old Green Grasshopper, Earthworm, Ladybug, Glowworm, and Silkworm, who become his friends. The next day, Centipede cuts the stem of the peach, causing it to roll away and crush James's ants. It reaches the sea and is surrounded by ravenous sharks. James uses Mrs. Spider and Silkworm to make threads, while Earthworm is used as bait to draw 502 seagulls to the peach. Whereupon the threads are tied onto their necks. The peach is lifted off the water high above the clouds. James realizes that the group has reached New York City. The massive peach lands on the spire of the Empire State Building, is mistaken as a bomb at first, resulting in the arrival of police and firemen. Calming the crowd, James tells his story and becomes friends with many children in New York. They eat the peach, and James and his friends get their own jobs. That sounds crazy. Oh, Rodal. Then there's The Outsiders by S.C. Hinton, and it's a coming-of-age story. Hilton was apparently 15 years old when she started writing the novel. And it's about Ponyboy Curtis, who's a member of a loose gang of greasers. It was such a great portrayal of all these different personalities of these kids. And I feel like I need to reread The Outsiders because I remember loving it so much when I was a kid. And I just love the clash of these two different gangs, the greasers and the socks. Rebellious they seemed to me at that time and that age, and the quest for freedom and getting away from the parents, which they kind of do in the book, but obviously there's consequences. But anyways, I love that book. Island of the Blue Dolphins is loosely based on the true story of indigenous population of people on an island called Island of the Blue Dolphins. That was off the coast of the U.S. The true story was that mainland Americans came over and found this population of indigenous people and offered to them to resettle them on the mainland. And they all agreed to come to the mainland. And one girl and her brother gets left behind. And so it's about her survival story on the island after everyone is taken from the island and sort of what happens. I don't want to ruin the story, but so much heartbreak, and it was really tragic, but it's such an amazing story. Now, the only one of these that I have a personal copy of is Island of the Blue Dolphins. And I know I've mentioned this book several times, and I have never read any of these books, actually, again, since I did read them in school. And I'm sort of afraid to reread some of them. And some of them I feel like I should just get it over with and just reread some and see how I feel about it now. But an interesting thing is that Julie of the Wolves and Island of the Blue Dolphins are still on the reading list. But removed from this list seems to be Charlotte's Web, James and the Giant Peach, and The Outsiders, which is so classic. It's sort of strange to think that they've been removed from that list, but I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning behind that was, and new books have been added to the list, and so I'm not exactly sure why they took them out, especially Charlotte's Web. I remember my teacher, my 6th grade teacher, reading that to the class, and I cried. It was so good. So good. Then in junior high, I believe in grade 7, I read Waiting for the Rain. Then in grade 8, I read Winners. And in grade 9, I read Diary of Anne Frank. And of those ones, the only one I do have a physical copy of is The Diary of Anne Frank. And this was amazing. It had a huge impact on me. And something that I really enjoyed about Waiting for the Rain and Winners and Diary of Anne Frank was how much it exposed cultures from different parts of the world to me that I was unaware of, especially being from an immigrant family. I didn't really understand a lot of those. One of them was from Canada, but didn't really understand a lot of the history behind it. So it was really great to read about. And then Waiting for the Rain takes place in, I believe, in South Africa. And obviously Diary of Anne Frank takes place during World War II in Amsterdam. And then Waiting for the Rain takes place in South Africa during apartheid. And it's about 2 lifelong friends and how they basically grow up among this huge tragedy that happens in South Africa at the time. So that was a really great read. I remember really enjoying it. And then Winners actually is set in southern Alberta on the Ash Creek Reserve and is about a 15-year-old boy who's lived in different foster homes. So he gets into horseback riding and then starts a friendship with a blind girl, and he ends up entering this 100-mile race on horseback. And I really enjoyed it, and great that I did get to read it in school. And then my high school years, grades 10, 11, and 12, we also got into Shakespeare in high school. We read a different Shakespeare work in each of those years, and I can't remember what order we read these Shakespeare plays, but I'll go over those at the end. So I remember in grade 10, we read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I do have a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. This is the other book that I didn't end up reading, and I don't know why exactly. It is written in dialect. I don't mind books written in dialect, and that wasn't the thing that made me stop reading it. And the funniest part is I bought this in a box set with The Watchmen, and I tried to get back into reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and I stopped again. Like, you can see where my bookmark is there. So I'm not exactly sure what it is about this book that I just struggle with. I'm not sure if it's the pacing off the start, or I forget when I tried reading this again. It was a while ago. I'm going to try to get into it one more time before I just completely give up on it. But I'm not sure if it's the pacing or how the characters are laid out. And I felt a lot of apathy to all of the characters as I did begin reading it again. I didn't get very far though, to be clear. I think I only got to page 15. So, I mean, I didn't get very far. So I'm going to give it another go. Then grade 11, I read My Name is Asher Lev. And I loved this. It really spoke to me at the time that I did read this. The main character's name is Asher Lev. It's about, he is a lad over Hasid who needs to keep kosher. He is Jewish and lives in a very religious family. And he is an artist, and being an artist is not an acceptable form of employment for his family. And so it's sort of, but he's genius and he's gifted. And so it's sort of him trying to come to terms with how his family will or won't accept him and what he really feels is his calling in life. And I absolutely loved it, and I highly recommend. And then in grade 12, I read The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck, and another book that I just devoured. Like, it got to the point, I loved this book and quite a few of these books. The biggest struggle was always to stick to the chapters that they expected us to read in a certain period of time. Because for me, I would start reading and I would just keep reading, and I'd be so far ahead of the rest of the class that they'd be asking questions I'd almost forgotten about all the stuff that came before. So they'd ask questions about, like, oh, what is this character doing? What's this character doing? And I'd want to respond with what they're doing right now. But I was so far ahead of where everyone else was reading in the class that it was sometimes a struggle to remember what they were doing back then. So it was sort of humorous. And I loved this book so much that I still remember the main character. I can't remember his name, but I remember his wife's name, who is Olan. This book takes place in China. And it is during the reign of the last Chinese emperor and all the big social and political upheavals that happened during the last reign. And it takes place with this man, as he starts out very poor and he's a farmer, and slowly his life changes and he becomes wealthy, with the boom and bust of what was happening politically in China at the time. This book actually did win the Pulitzer, and it's really, I think, a story that lots of people could relate to and identify with, and I really enjoyed reading it. I mean, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend. The other interesting things is of junior high and high school books. The two books that are no longer on the reading list that I'd mentioned earlier is The Good Earth and The Diary of Anne Frank, which seems unfortunate because The Diary of Anne Frank, one of the most read books in the world. And I think at one point, I'm not sure if it still is, was the second most bought book behind the Bible, I think. So it's unfortunate that they're not using it in schools anymore, at least in Alberta. And then The Good Earth is also unfortunate considering I really loved it, although perhaps some of these books some of the students complained about or didn't enjoy or didn't like or appreciate, or maybe the parents didn't. I'm not quite sure. Or maybe the teachers got poor feedback from students over the years, and that's why they've changed the reading lists. Who knows? And then when it comes to the Shakespeare works that I did read when I was in high school, I believe the first one we did read in grade 10 was Romeo and Juliet. I remember us reading the book and also watching the movie in class. And the version that we did watch, I believe we watched the old version, like the really old version, and then we watched the Leonardo DiCaprio reincarnation of it with Claire Danes. I mean, Romeo and Juliet was a good tragedy. And then I think in grade 11, we read A Twelfth Night, which also great. Really loved this one. And then I believe in grade 12, we read Othello. Also loved Othello. And I remember reading it in class with my teacher and just literally eating it up. It was so good. And so I'm still working through reading, getting through all of Shakespeare's works. Well, in my Shakespeare challenge. This year is my challenge, my goal to get through all of the histories. So far it's looking pretty good. I think it's going to happen this year. But yeah, those were all the books that I read in school. Is my list dramatically different than yours? What did you read when you were in school? Do you remember? Did you like them? Did you hate them? Did you think that the books that your teacher had you read in class ruined your love of reading, or did you love them like I did? Or I just always remember, like, no one else in my family were readers, and so I just loved having someone else recommend a book for me to read, and these books were so far outside of what I would have been reading or what was recommended to me by the general school fairs or what seemed to be recommended to children. Like I remember reading lots of Goosebumps, and I remember reading those Pick Your Own Adventures and those kinds of stories, or ones that seemed more fun and maybe more genre based. But then I really loved, again, like someone just recommending something so outside of your wheelhouse or that you're even aware of. And I was completely unaware of any of those books existing. So let me know in the comments down below what you read for school, and if you liked or enjoyed it, or if it ruined your reading experience. Please like and subscribe so more people can join the conversation and find some great books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.